The sea groaned far below, a vast pane of hammered iron reaching out to a horizon streaked with the bruised colours of dawn. Salt wind shrieked up the white cliffs, scouring their face with a violence that turned stone to powder, and yet the 7 figures upon that high precipice did not move. They stood as statues carved from the stone itself, unmoving beneath their crimson-crossed cloaks, eyes hidden beneath the visors of war helms aged by fire, salt, and ash. These were knights of St. George, sworn to crown and cross, officers of the realm, guardians of the old coastlines whose borders still remembered the first invasions. Their post was neither for show nor reverence. It was obligation, plain and grim. They watched the sea because someone had to, because turning their backs on it had never ended well. Sir Caldus Marchmont stood at their head, a bastion in steel, his great cloak whipped in the wind, its hem embroidered with the scripture of war. He bore the blade Wormcleave across his back, an ancient relic reforged with the shard of Katana, blessed by 3 archbishops and quenched in the blood of traitors. The Lion of England blazed on his pauldron, worn gold on storm-dark steel. His eyes, though hidden, did not wander. He watched the sea as he had done 100 times before. Behind him, the other 6 knights stood at quiet ease, each engaged in the minor rituals of readiness. Sir Godwin knelt to check the seals on his gauntlets, mouthing a litany more from habit than any need for salvation. Sir Osgar, the standard-bearer, adjusted the strap securing the travel altar lashed to his pack. Its silver fittings caught the light, flickering faintly. Sir Arwell, once of the Hollow Hills, tested the edge of his blade with a leather-gloved thumb. Sir Tullian, youngest of them all, stood apart from the others by a few paces, reciting the Catechism of Endurance in a voice made thin by the cold. He had only worn the mantle for a month. The others said nothing to him, not out of contempt, but experience. The first watch always weighs heavier than the armour. A gull wheeled overhead, then vanished into the mist. A clod of wet stone tumbled from the edge, falling without sound into the surf. The wind roared, carrying with it the smell of distant rain and old gunpowder, perhaps from some skirmish far inland, or perhaps just the memory of war clinging to the land. There was no alarm, no horn, only wind, only silence, and the long, slow exhale of men performing their duty with practiced steadiness. So the knights stood, iron-bound and wind-battered, watchers upon the cliff, guardians not of legend but of necessity, expecting no thanks, fearing no fate, prepared to fulfill their sworn duty. It began with the wind. For days it had screamed and howled across the channel, but now it had gone still. The sea below, once thrashing and wild, was momentarily glass, a vast mirror stained with soot and distant fire. The silence was heavy, almost sacred, broken only by the occasional hiss of spray and the creak of steel joints in armour, long worn. Sir Caldus Marchmont turned his helm slightly, scanning the waterline with a gaze honed by 30 years of siege and salt. The younger knights took note. Sir Tullian shifted to follow his commander's stare. The others did not need to look. They knew what was coming. On the horizon, a black smear had formed. Smoke. The edge of the world trembled. A shape resolved itself in the haze. Massive, crawling, half obscured by cloud and distance. "Britannia," Sir Godwin murmured, his voice a gravel rasp. The moving fortress of Britannia, a citadel upon the sea, the engine of England's fury. The Leviathan crawled across the waves with impossible grace, its superstructure bristling with cannon and cathedral spires. Thunderheads gathered in its wake like a crown, Its deck swarmed with the silhouettes of aircraft and artillery, smaller vessels encircling it like satellites. From their vantage, the knights could see bursts of light flicker across its hull, muzzle flashes, cannon fire. Then, a second shape emerged from the mist, and a third, dozens. "The heretics have brought a full flotilla," Sir Arwell said, spitting to the side. The sea writhed as the enemy approached. Heretic ships, grotesque and blasphemous, surged through the waves. Some were rusted monsters adorned with living flesh. Others bore effigies of serpents, inverted saints, and leering, toothy idols. One vessel jutted with bone rigging and burned with constant flame. Another dragged a chain of drowned corpses like a banner. From their cliffside perch, the Knights of St. George bore witness as the fleets met. A flash, then a thunderclap that rolled up from the sea and rattled through the stone beneath their feet. Britannia's forward batteries had spoken. Shells the size of carriages screamed across the water, smashing into the heretic front line. One enemy ship vanished in a boiling plume of steam and shattered hull. Another limped, burning, until its munitions caught, and it was ripped apart from within. Then the heretics answered. Black flame and shrieking bombardments rose from the infernal flotilla. Some fell short, others soared overhead toward Britannia. One struck true, on the portside tower of the fortress, tearing holy metal and sending men sprawling. The knights remained still. "The line will hold," Sir Caldus said, more to the wind than to his brothers. Above them, the Three Lions banner stirred in the rising heat. The sky had begun to darken, not with storm, but smoke. The battle had begun, and it was only the beginning. The sea was fire. Below the cliff, the waters had vanished beneath a forest of smoke and iron. The heretic fleet, once proud and swift, now writhed in ruin. The moving fortress of Britannia loomed behind the carnage, half shrouded by the thick bloom of its own artillery fire. Its guns thundered in a relentless rhythm, each barrage a sermon, each shell a holy rebuke. A heretic destroyer, a spine thing shaped like a leviathan skull, attempted to flank. It barely managed to turn its rusted prow before Britannia's mid-deck batteries opened fire. The ship disintegrated beneath a curtain of explosions, its stern lifted into the air before snapping and vanishing into the waves. Another vessel, one shaped like a cathedral turned inside out, surged forward behind a wall of flame. It loosed a volley of shrieking red-black shells that arced toward the fortress, only to be intercepted mid-air by a broadside from one of Britannia's escort corvettes. The resulting detonation tore a wound in the sky, illuminating the scene below in a blinding burst of white. "Glory be," Sir Godwin whispered. "They fight like the wrath of heaven." Aircraft screamed overhead, diving from the decks of the fortress. Painted with crosses and fire, they fell like avenging angels upon the enemy. Napalm and bomb tore through hulls and decks, scattering the heretics like insects before a flame. One heretic ship, larger than the rest, had somehow survived the first barrage. Its prow was shaped like a laughing idol, its sides a patchwork of brass and blighted iron. Even as the fire consumed it, shapes leapt from its decks. Twisted forms in dive armor, their heresy etched into every inch of their gear. "Boarders," Sir Arwell growled. "Let them come," said Caldus. "They will find the Knights of St. George waiting." Below, Britannia shifted course, bearing down on the heart of the enemy formation. Its bow opened like the petals of a monstrous flower. From within, a new barrage thundered forth. Short range, high caliber, point-blank annihilation. 3 heretic ships vanished in that moment, their wreckage flung wide across the sea. The knights watched, wordless, the reflections of fire dancing across their plate. The battle was turning. The fortress was winning. Amidst the glory of cannonade and righteous fire, a shadow moved. The knights saw it only because they had been warned. Before departing the fortress, a ranking prelate of the synod, his eyes cataracted with prophecy, had pressed a scroll into Sir Caldus's hand. A brief passage, barely longer than a breath. Beware the serpent veiled in smoke. It shall bear the knife that sings and go unseen by the wrath of steel. They had committed it to memory, uncertain if it was metaphor or madness. But now, as the firelight flickered across the sea, something stirred where no ship should be. A sliver of absence in the flame-wreathed waters, gliding through the smoke with unnatural stillness. It moved between the burning hulks like a phantom, its silhouette visible only in the moments when firelight caught on its hull. Sir Tullian frowned. That one, does it fly no colours? Sir Oscar was already sighting down his rangefinder. No signal, no banner. It's not in the flotilla's formation. It isn't running with the current. Sir Caldus stepped forward, lowering his helm's visor. A cloaked hull, he said grimly. Fell sorcery. He turned to Sir Godwyn. The warning? Godwyn's expression darkened. The burning waters will part for the serpent that bears no name. It shall come ashore without fire, bearing the knife that sings. Tullian made the sign of the pierced dragon across his chest. You think? I think the prophet saw true, Caldus said, and I think the fortress has not seen it. The black ship was close now, skimming the sea with impossible silence. The wake behind it did not foam but shimmered. Light bent, water confused, reality disarmed. Then, for a heartbeat, the knights saw the shape upon its prow, a shrouded figure, unmoving, clutching a long blade. No crew, no smoke, no lights, just the assassin and the ship. It will land south of the cove, said Caldus, near the chapel ruins, where the patrols cannot see. He turned to his brothers. Hold your tongues. Do not call out. The fortress must not know. That one sails not for conquest, but for murder. Its quarry is crowned. And so, as the sea roared, and Britannia roared louder still, the knights of St. George turned their eyes from glory and looked instead into the shadow. The descent was steep and treacherous. The cliff paths were narrow switchbacks of stone and shale, choked by brambles and slick with seawater. But the knights moved with the certainty of men who had walked every inch of their island in both peace and siege. Steel-shod boots crushed thorn and gravel, and the standard of St. George was lowered to keep it from the sight of distant sails. When they reached the rocks near the chapel ruins, the heretic ship was already there, just as Caldus had said it would be. It sat like a carcass, silent and dead. The black hull was scorched from within, its sides split as if by a great pressure from inside. Runes still glowed faintly along its ribs, pulsing like embers in cooling ash, but the deck was empty. Sir Tullian climbed onto the ruin of the prow and peered down. No assassin, he whispered. Gone. Caldus turned his gaze inland. He's begun the hunt. Then came the splash, just a whisper of water behind them, then another. The knights turned just as the sea itself erupted. Figures surged up from the surf. Heretic naval raiders in rusted dive armour, barnacle-encrusted and glistening with slime. They rose in silence, blades in hand, water sluicing from the tanks on their backs. Their masks were made from fishbone and iron, their eyes dull green with unnatural light. "Form ranks," Caldus roared, sword flashing free. The battle was instant. One knight fell, pulled into the water by a chain hook. Another raider leapt from the shallows with a boarding axe and was met mid-air by Sir Arwell's blade. There was no war cry, no trumpet, only the crash of steel and the hiss of breath inside ancient helms. "They were waiting," Sir Godwyn growled, parrying a curved blade. The ship was a lure. "They want our blood," Caldus answered, slashing downward. "Let us bleed with purpose." And so they did. Beneath the ruined chapel, beside the wrecked ship of shadows, the Knights of St. George held the line once more. The clash became a press of bodies, wet stone, and screaming metal. The Knights of St. George stood shoulder to shoulder, greatswords drawn, blades as tall as a man, too heavy for ordinary hands, forged for moments like this. The steel sang as it split the sea mist, and where it landed, it broke raiders like driftwood. Sir Caldus cleaved through the first line, Wormacleave hissing through armour and flesh. He stepped over the fallen without pause, turning into the next blow. A raider raised a harpoon gun. Caldus's sword took him from shoulder to hip, and the air filled with steam and blood. To his left, Sir Arwell fought like a wolf cornered, blade sweeping in wide arcs. His strokes carved space, forcing the enemy to falter or die. Blood slicked his gauntlets, but his footwork never wavered. Sir Oscar fought with the banner pole itself, brass-tipped and blessed. With it, he smashed skulls and limbs alike, roaring a psalm of war between ragged breaths. Tullian, youngest of them, was knocked from his feet by a raider's tackle. They wrestled in the surf, salt water choking the gaps in his armour. The heretic raised a skinning hook. Then his head snapped back, split by a downward stroke from Sir Godwyn's greatsword. "On your feet, lad," Godwyn bellowed. Offering no hand, only another command. "Guard the left." They formed a wedge, backs to the chapel ruin, the broken ship behind them, and pressed forward into the sea-slicked stone. Each swing was measured, brutal, final. The heretics had numbers, but the knights had reach and discipline honed over decades of ritual war. The beach ran red. The tide came in and was stained for its trouble. But the knights did not falter. As the raiders pressed again, Sir Oscar caught sight of movement at the edge of the surf, a hand clawing through the foam. The knight who had been dragged into the water earlier thought lost. Without a word, Oscar barreled through the line, seized the fallen brother by the collar of his sodden cloak, and hauled him free with a grunt. Sir Arwell turned and covered them, cutting down a charging raider in a single, savage stroke. The rescued knight gasped for breath, coughing seawater and blood, but he gripped his sword with renewed strength. "You're late," Godwyn growled, helping him to his feet. "And you're old," the knight rasped back, falling into step. Caldus called above the din, "Tullian, fire the flare." The boy drew the wand from his belt and fired. The flare screamed into the sky, a red star arcing over the cliffs like a beacon of defiance. "We hold this ground," Caldus muttered, "and we mark it for the crown." With blades singing and blood in the foam, the knights hewed down another wave. They were saints of the sword now, unyielding, grim, and more than equal to their foe. The flare's light had barely begun to fade when the rhythm of the battle changed. The heretic raiders faltered. It began with a single retreat, one raider slipping back into the waves with unnatural ease, then another, and another. They vanished into the sea like phantoms, slipping beneath the surface with barely a ripple. The knights, breathing hard, bloodied but unbowed, tightened their line. "What are they doing?" Sir Telian asked, watching one masked figure disappear into the foam. "Fleeing," Arwell muttered. "No," Caldus said, voice low. "Not fleeing. Finished." Out at sea, distant searchlights from escort ships began to flicker through the mist. The answering thunder of cannons came soon after, England's wrath stirring at last. "They spotted our flare," Godwin said. But Caldus didn't move. His eyes lingered on the empty ship, on the water now calm and black as pitch. "No," he said again. "This wasn't their aim. This was distraction." Osgar lowered the banner. "You think—" "I know." Caldus turned from the shore, helm grim. The assassins already gone ashore. This fight was only to slow us, to keep us here while he vanished into the woods. Tullian looked back toward the ruins, toward the cliffs and the trails leading inland. The wind was shifting. Smoke drifted not from ships, but from somewhere farther up the coast. "Then we've wasted time," he said, dread blooming. "No," Caldus said. "We brought England a warning. Mount up, we move now." And with that, the Knights of St. George turned from the sea, leaving the dead to the tide and the surf, and began the march inland, their blades still warm with blood, their purpose only now made clear. Their war horses stood tethered above the cliffs, steam rising from their flanks in the cool air. The knights mounted in silence, their armor groaning beneath them, great swords strapped to their backs. No horns were sounded, no prayers spoken. The oath had already been made. The path inland wound through black pine and broken hedgerows. The rain had turned the road to mud, and the hooves of their chargers struck wet earth with slow, heavy rhythm. Crows fled from trees ahead of them, but otherwise the land was still. As they crested a low ridge, the village came into view. It should have been alive with light, lanterns in windows, smoke rising from chimneys, the last signs of supper and song. But it was dark. No fires, no movement, no bells from the chapel tower. Just the wind through the rooftops and the soft tap of a loose shutter against stone. Sir Tullian reined in his steed. "It's wrong," he said. "It's empty," Sir Arwell answered, "and not by choice." Caldus narrowed his eyes beneath his helm. The thatch looked untouched. The fields were not trampled. The doors not broken. There were no signs of struggle. No smoke, no ruin. "They left quietly," he said, "or something made them vanish." He raised a hand, halting the column. "We do not go further. Not yet." The knights dismounted at the ridge's crest, remaining in the tree line. They watched the village from afar, their armor dim beneath branches heavy with damp. Their breaths fogged the air. There was no movement in the streets, no candlelight behind shutters, no livestock braying in the pens. A village not merely still, but paused. Sir Osgar drew a small spyglass and scanned the streets. "Not even a dog," he said. Sir Godwin grunted. "Dead or hiding, either way, wrong." They stood in silence for a long moment more, the wind tugging at their cloaks. And still the village waited, mute, patient, and watching back. Dusk crept in heavy and low, painting the mist with bruised light as the sun bled behind the hills. The Knights of St. George broke from the tree line, advancing at a cautious pace, their horses left behind on the ridge. The mud sucked at their boots, and the village ahead loomed quiet as a mausoleum. No cries of alarm, no bells to welcome them. The narrow path into the village was flanked by low stone walls and empty homes. Shutters hung open. Windows stared blankly, A line of laundry flapped half-heartedly in the breeze, untouched for days. Talian's voice was hushed. "Where are the people?" "Gone," said Oscar, "or hiding behind those doors. But I'd wager we won't find them alive." They passed a well, its bucket left mid-drawer, swaying faintly in a breeze that no longer seemed natural. A loaf of bread lay rotting on a doorstep. A child's toy floated in a puddle. Each house was the same, intact but abandoned, frozen in the middle of a life interrupted. There were no signs of struggle, no blood, no broken glass, just stillness. A village arrested in the moment before its heart stopped beating. Ahead rose the chapel. Its bell tower stood crooked against the haze, crucifix bent as though bowed in mourning. Smoke, thin and black, rose from its chimney. Unlike the rest of the village, the chapel lived, and it watched them. "Something remains," Caldus said. His voice was cold. "Only evil abides in silence this thick," muttered Sir Godwyn. "Steel in hand," Caldus ordered. "We go forward, eyes open, hearts guarded." With great swords drawn and tabards soaked in sea and blood, the knights stepped through the first line of empty homes and into the hollow breath of the village. The doors of the chapel yawned open, like a mouth awaiting its meal. The interior stank of incense and rot. The air inside was thick, humid, unnaturally warm. The last light of dusk filtered through stained glass warped with soot, casting broken saints in sickly reds and bruised purples. The nave stretched before them, pews untouched, the altar wreathed in shadow. Along the walls, holy icons had been turned. Crosses hung upside down. Candles burned with greenish fire. They advanced slowly, boots echoing on old flagstone. Every footfall sounded too loud. At the foot of the altar knelt a figure in priestly robes. His back to them, head bowed, arms raised in benediction or prayer. The smoke from the censer beside him coiled in unnatural spirals, its scent more cloying than holy. Talion started forward, but Caldus raised a hand. "Hold," he said. The figure did not turn. A low chant drifted from the priest's lips, words in a tongue that sounded like scripture but felt like sin. "Is he alone?" Oscar asked. "No," Caldus answered. "Something's wrong with this place." The knights spread out slightly, weapons held low but ready, circling the pews as they neared the altar. The figure remained unmoving, still knelt in mock devotion before a sanctuary that reeked of desecration. And high above, from the rafters lost in shadow, something unseen creaked in time with their breaths. Sir Tullian, nerves taut, stepped forward. "Priest," he called, "stand, speak your name." The figure did not respond. He reached the altar's base, sword held ready, and extended a gauntlet to touch the man's shoulder. The priest twisted. With a sound like tearing parchment and breaking bone, the robed figure turned his head, too far, too fast. Where a face should have been, there was only a mass of weeping sores, eyes like hollow coins, and a mouth sewn shut with strands of blood-slick sinew. The robes fell back to reveal a chest bloated and veined black, the sigil of the Black Grail etched into its flesh with rot. Talion recoiled, blade half raised. Too late. From the rafters above, the assassin dropped. A blur of black fabric and glinting steel. It landed atop an unaware knight with a sickening crunch, dagger plunging beneath his gorget. The knight gasped once, then collapsed without a cry. "Above!" Oscar shouted. The assassin vanished again, slipping into the shadows between pews with impossible speed. The knights gave chase, Sir Godwin sweeping benches aside, Oscar vaulting the altar rail. But the killer danced through gloom like smoke. Then came the knock. A door at the far end of the chapel creaked open. Figures poured through. Villagers, once human, now shambling mockeries. Skin sloughed from their arms, their mouths sewn or torn open in unnatural smiles. Black bile oozed from their nostrils and eyes. They bore farming tools, rusted blades, and naked hands stained with filth. The corrupted horde. "We're flanked," Godwin shouted. "They were here all along," Calder said, grim, buried in the silence. He raised Wormcleave. "Form the line. Make them earn every inch of this holy ground." The knights moved quickly, forming a half-moon around the altar as the horde surged into the chapel. Their greatswords gleamed beneath the flickering green candlelight, ready to carve through the tide of corruption. Then the shadows moved again. With barely a whisper of breath, the assassin struck. He flowed through the shadows like ink and struck from behind Sir Godwin, plunging a stiletto into the gap between cuisse and greave. Godwin roared, stumbling, his legs suddenly boneless. Before Calders could reach him, the assassin kicked the wounded knight forward, straight into the approaching mob. Hands seized Godwin's arms and legs. He fought back, blade flashing, teeth bared, but they pulled him under like a tide, shrieking and slavering. Godwin's sword clattered away, lost beneath a tangle of limbs. "Godwin!" Tullian screamed. A second later, a gout of blackened blood sprayed into the air. Calder surged forward, Wormcleave swinging, carving a path through the thralls. But the assassin was already gone, swallowed again by the gloom. "Damn him!" Calder spat. "He strikes like a viper and vanishes like smoke." The chapel was chaos. Green candlelight and screaming dead, steel and shrieks. Every pew had become a barricade or a trap. Every shadow a weapon. Tullian pressed to Calder's side, swinging in practiced arcs. "He's separating us." "And thinning us," Calder growled. "Make them pay for every step." "Form ranks," cried Sir Arwell, rallying the others. "Close the gaps." But the press was tightening. The horde came in waves, teeth gnashing, eyes blind with devotion to rot. And above them still, the rafters whispered. The line broke, not from fear, but necessity. The press of bodies, the crush of corrupted limbs and rusted tools, forced the knights apart. One by one, they were drawn into separate struggles, each fighting alone amid pews overturned and icons defiled. Sir Caldus stood atop the altar dais, Wormcleave singing death. Each blow split skull from spine, each parry turned aside fang and blade. The assassin's movements danced at the edge of his vision, but Caldus ignored him, anchoring the centre through sheer force of will. At the nave's edge, Tullian fought with desperate grace. He leapt from pew to pew, his greatsword cleaving downward like divine judgment. A horde swarmed below him, reaching for his legs, but he stayed high, using the chapel's broken architecture to stay mobile, never letting the dead surround him. In the side aisle, Sir Oscar fought not with blade, but with banner. The pole arm cracked skulls and burst ribs, the tattered cloth of St. George trailing smoke as he swept it in great arcs. He drove his enemies back from a wounded brother's body, planting the banner beside them like a defiant standard. Sir Arwell had been driven behind the pulpit. There, in the dimness between candle flame and icon, he fought 3 of the twisted villagers alone. One had antlers fused to its skull. Another moved like a puppet with its strings cut. But Arwell moved faster. He parried with the haft of his sword, then struck with precision honed over years of war. When he felled the last, he stood alone in the dark, panting, waiting for the next wave. Still they fought. The floor was slick, the air choked with incense and rot. From above came the hiss of rope, the scrape of hidden limbs. And somewhere between shadow and breath, the assassin waited, blade poised for the next heart to stop. The assassin reappeared with deadly purpose. From the rafters, he dropped like a hawk toward wounded Sir Osgar, seeking not to kill, but to seize the banner from his dying grasp. But steel met steel. Tullian was faster. He crashed into the assassin mid-lunge, shoulder first, knocking him away from the standard. The two tumbled across the flagstones, blades flashing in the torchlight, then sprang to their feet, blades drawn, breath heaving. The assassin struck first. Blindingly fast, his dagger danced in narrow arcs, probing for weakness. Tullian blocked, twisted, parried, a desperate defense against a foe that moved like a shadow with purpose. The clash rang through the chapel, loud even above the screams of the horde. Tullian stepped back, pivoting to keep himself between the banner and the killer. "You'll not have it," he growled. "Not while I breathe." The assassin gave no answer, only lunged again. Their weapons sparked, locked, parted. Tullian's sword was heavier, but the assassin's was quicker. He slashed for Tullian's neck, his ribs, his thigh, each narrowly turned aside. Tullian grunted as a shallow cut opened across his left shoulder. He staggered, then drove forward with a howl, swinging his blade in a wide arc that forced the assassin back. From the periphery, Caldus caught the motion and began to cut his way toward them, but the horde thickened, sensing blood. And still the assassin pressed Tullian, seeking the opening, the one heartbeat of weakness. But the young knight stood his ground. Smoke choked the chapel's rafters, and blood pooled in its aisles. Caldus found Sir Arwell as another wave of the corrupted crashed into the sanctuary. The two knights locked eyes, grim, bloodied, resolute, and fell into motion without a word. Back to back, they became a wall of steel and purpose. Arwell swung wide, cutting down a villager with a jaw torn open to the sternum. Caldus thrust forward, driving Wormcleave through a heretic whose face still wore a mask of human skin. They pivoted in unison, blades cleaving with mechanical precision. "I thought I saw you fall," Caldus muttered, breath ragged. "Was too angry to die," Arwell growled. "Besides, I heard you'd be lonely without me." A thrall lunged with a meat cleaver. Arwell caught its arm on his vambrace and drove his sword through its throat. Caldus turned in time to catch another, this one dressed in the rags of a chapel deacon, across the chest. Around them, the corrupted surged. The air was thick with the stink of bile and candle wax, the pews reduced to barricades and kindling. "They're not trying to kill us," Arwell said, parrying a two-pronged rake. "They're keeping us back." "They want the banner," Caldus replied. Then they heard it, steel ringing against steel. Tullian's voice shouting, distant and defiant. "They've sent him alone," Arwell spat. "We have to break through." Caldus growled, then pressed forward. Arwell followed. They moved with fury, not desperation, striking low, high, and hard. One villager's head burst under Caldus's pommel. Arwell ducked and slit the gut of another, entrails spilling across broken stone. Together, they carved a path. A brief clearing formed. Through the smoke, they glimpsed Tullian, locked in a duel with the assassin, fending him off with sweat and fury. Caldus roared, and the two knights surged forward once more. Behind them, the chapel howled, but ahead, the banner still stood, They reached the heart of the chapel just as Tullian faltered. Blood streaked his arms, his side. His sword arm trembled. The assassin closed in, gliding across the stones like a phantom, blade poised for the killing stroke. But then Tullian spoke. He did not scream. He did not curse. He began to pray. Saint George, shield of the meek, give strength to my limbs. Give fire to my soul. The words rang strange and clear in the desecrated chapel, a prayer spoken not with practiced piety, but raw, desperate faith. The assassin paused, only for a moment. It was enough. Tullian surged forward, parrying the assassin's thrust with a howl. His greatsword came down like judgment, forcing the killer to retreat in a blur of motion. He advanced. Let this ground be sanctified by blood freely given. Strike, parry, clash. Let my body be the wall that stands between light and dark. Caldus and Arwell reached the edge of the duel, but held their ground, stunned. Tullian pressed forward with unnatural fury, the words of the prayer rolling from his lips like a litany of defiance. Let the banner never fall, not while one of us breathes. The assassin struck again. Tullian caught his wrist, twisted, and slammed his forehead into the masked face of the killer. The assassin staggered back. Caldus whispered, "He should be dead." Arwell nodded slowly. "Then maybe he is, and something holier walks in his stead." And so the prayer continued, louder now, as Tullian pressed the assassin back toward the base of the altar. Steel and scripture, blood and belief. And through it all, the banner still stood. A crack echoed through the night, not of blade, but of gunfire. The knights froze for a heartbeat. Then a second shot rang out, then another. From beyond the chapel walls came the unmistakable sound of disciplined volley fire. Short, brutal bursts, echoing across the village square. "Reinforcements," Arwell said, voice half laughter, half disbelief. From the ruined windows, muzzle flashes lit the mist in sharp, staccato bursts. The shrieks of the corrupted twisted into gurgles and silence. The hammer of the church's wrath had come. They could hear them now, faithful infantry moving with practiced steps, clearing buildings, slaying what remained of the desecrated villagers. Shot by shot, the horde within the chapel began to thin. Still, at the altar's base, the assassin fought on. Tullian drove him back again and again, blood running freely from his wounds, prayer flowing without falter. "Let no shadow stand in his light," he chanted, voice rising. The assassin lunged. Tullian turned the strike aside with a shout, his sword flashing up and across in a brutal diagonal arc. Steel met flesh. The assassin fell back, clutching his side. He tried to vanish again into the gloom, but there was nowhere left to flee. Light was returning. Gunfire roared behind the chapel doors. Caldus and Arwell stepped forward as the final moment drew near. Tullian advanced, breath ragged, sword steady. "This is sacred ground," he whispered, "and you have defiled it long enough." With one last prayer on his lips, he drove his sword home. For a moment, the chapel was still. The assassin crumpled, body twitching once, then laying still beneath the altar's broken shadow. The foul whispers that had haunted the rafters seemed to draw back, scattering like smoke before incense. Tullian stood over the corpse, chest heaving, blade slick with dark blood. Then his legs buckled. He dropped to one knee, then both, sword falling from his grasp with a dull clang. Blood streamed from his nose, from his ears, and down the seams of his helm. "Tullian," Caldus called, rushing forward. The young knight did not answer. He raised one hand as if to steady himself, then simply sagged forward, collapsing beside the body of the assassin. Arwell reached him a moment later, tearing off Tullian's helm. His face was pale, eyes glassy and rimmed with burst vessels. Blood trickled from one ear in a slow, steady line. "He's alive," Arwell said. "But gods, he shouldn't be." Caldus knelt beside them, hand resting on the boy's shoulder. Around them, the thunder of faithful guns still echoed as the village was purged. The chapel, once overrun, was now silent, but for the rasp of Tullian's breath. And at the heart of it all, the banner still stood. By dawn, the village was ash and silence. Faithful soldiers moved through the ruins with practiced precision, their white tabards streaked with soot and blood. They cleared homes, extinguished fires, gathered bodies, some to be buried, others to be burned. The chapel stood at the center of it all, scorched but upright. Inside, a hush hung heavier than incense. Tullian lay on a pallet of torn banners and shattered pews, his breath shallow, eyes closed. Blood still crusted his ears and stained the corners of his mouth. Caldus and Arwell stood nearby, unspeaking, as a delegation of ranking clergy entered the ruined sanctuary. A bishop in red robes knelt beside the young knight, his hands trembling. "Impossible," the man whispered. "He should be dead 10 times over." One of the attending abbots bent close to Tullian's chest, where the wounds had scabbed over with a strange, almost golden edge. He invoked the saints in a voice not his own, Caldus said quietly, fought like a man aflame. The bishop looked up, his face pale with awe. "Not a flame," he murmured. "Anointed. There is fire in his blood, the touch of the host." "He was dying," Arwell added. "We all saw it, and yet he stood." The bishop nodded slowly. "Then we shall not take him to a hospital. We shall carry him to the Cathedral of Light. The Synod must see this with their own eyes. He is not simply healed. He is marked." Outside, bells rang for the first time in days, and within the chapel, before the desecrated altar, the knights knelt, not in mourning, but in reverence. The journey to the Cathedral of Light began within the hour. Tullian remained comatose, his body unmoving save for the shallow rise and fall of his chest. He was borne not on a stretcher of cloth, but on a platform of steel and sanctified oak. Watched over by a robed faithful, and flanked by an honor guard of surviving knights, Caldus rode beside the procession, blood still crusted along his armor, Wormacleave resting across his lap. Arwell walked on foot, his sword sheathed, but his grip white-knuckled. "He hasn't stirred," Arwell said quietly. "Not once." "His soul's still fighting," Caldus answered. "The rest of him is catching up." Near the cathedral gates, a ranking hierophant emerged, an old man whose eyes burned with quiet authority. He examined Tullian, fingers hovering over the golden-edged wounds that lined the young knight's chest and arms. "This boy has touched the threshold of sanctity," the hierophant murmured. Caldus stepped forward. "Will he live?" The hierophant's gaze did not leave Tullian. Perhaps, perhaps not. The fire within him was divine, but it has left his body, brittle. The Synod will enact rites of reclamation, ancient treatments meant to temper what remains. Arwell frowned. "And if he survives?" "Then he will rise again," the priest said, "changed, perhaps no longer truly a knight, but something rarer, a blade wielded by the Lord's own hand." They fell silent as the doors to the inner sanctum opened. The light within was blinding, and into it the boy was carried, never to be seen again by his brother knights,